As we continue our goal of identifying champions of change, there are so many that we find right in our backyard. Bernie Milano has graciously served as a member of the Blue Ribbon Commission on Racial Equity, which was formed this summer. And he's been so engaged and so willing to share his years of experience working in corporate America and working in and on critical issues related to diversifying and creating inclusive workplaces. I met Bernie, and I finally got comfortable saying Bernie because for a long time he kept saying, it's Bernie, not Mr. Milano. I had the opportunity to meet him because, as many of you know, our CEO serves on the board of advisors, President's Board of Advisors on HBCUs. And Bernie is one of those rare individuals who has now served under 2 presidents on that particular board. And in his leadership of the KPMG Foundation, he has identified so many ways to so many ways that we can engage more people in discussions about creating diverse and inclusive workplaces. So it made so much sense that we bring him on to talk about a project that's been in existence for over 25 years, a project in which he was the leader for much of that time, and that a project that still continues today and is supported heavily by academia, corporate America. It's just such a mix of partners. So I want to welcome Bernie Milano, former president of the KPMG Foundation, former head of the PhD project, former partner at KPMG. Welcome, welcome.
That's a lot of formers, Emily. Thank you.
I don't think you're retired. You keep saying I'm retired. I know on your LinkedIn page you put retired, but I swear you got more going on than any retired person I know.
That's it. When you follow your passion, that's what happens.
Great. Well, I'm so excited that we get to talk about something I know you're extremely passionate about, the PhD project. Yes. And during the 25th year celebration of this project, which was not too long ago, in 2019, I believe it was 25 years.
Yes, yes.
You, on a video commemorating that work, you said, accept the status quo as is. You can't accept the status quo as is, or you make a risky move. So accept the status quo as is, or you make a risky move. That's what you're quoted as saying. I think you made a lot of risky moves in your career. When I read about your background, you were on partner track and you ended up becoming the first national partner for university relations right after you told them you were going to quit because you didn't think that could get you on the partner track. So that was risky. But you said you believe in transparency, so you went that way. Yeah. You had some risky moves in really acknowledging that we needed to diversify, not just the profession, but the people who lead you to the profession, the professors, the people with the doctorates who are educating the future generation of leaders.
Exactly.
So talk to me about how you got involved with that and how you decided that that was the thing to do.
Well, as you mentioned, I was responsible for university relations, which meant university recruiting, hiring a couple thousand students a year, either through internships or for permanent positions, and being totally frustrated not being able to find students of color. We could find students of color at HBCUs. We could not find students of color at TWIs, which are traditionally white institutions. And I had served on a couple of different boards, like Inroads. I was involved heavily with Inroads, a program called LEAD, a program called the Consortium for Graduate Study and Management. And all the corporations around the table would say the same thing. You know, we understand diversity is critically important. It's not just a social issue, it's a business issue. But gee, we just can't find any. And that became a legitimate excuse for poor results. Well, we weren't totally satisfied with that. I mean, if you have a business problem, typically you do everything you possibly can to solve the business problem. You don't just sit back and say, well, we just can't solve this. So we spent about a year trying to figure out what could we do that hadn't been done since civil rights legislation, which at that point, you mentioned 94, it was 30 years later. And after about a year, it dawned on us that if you have a university setting, especially in the business schools, where the traditionally white institutions, the students are white, the professors are white, the dean is white, the provost is white, the president's white. If you're students of color walking into that setting, not exactly welcoming, it doesn't exactly encourage you to move forward. So you move out and go over to other parts of the university that perhaps you feel more comfortable in and appear to be where you, quote, belong. So we just decided to take, you mentioned the word risky. This had never been tested, never been researched. But we thought, well, what if we had faculty of color? Would they then attract students of color, whether they be Black students? And we were focusing on Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. So we launched it. We didn't have a clue as to whether it was going to work or not, or where we were going to find people who wanted to get a PhD. There had been a program run over a 3-year period, 89 to 91, where they spent a tremendous amount of money putting 131 students of color through a mini doctoral exposure. It was the summer after their junior year in college. And I was on the board of an organization that was one of the big funders, and they were collapsing the program because it had been, quote, a failure. And by failure, they meant that one of the 131 had entered a doctoral program to become a professor, a fellow named Matthew Clayton. What they didn't realize at the time was they were planting seeds, because these people, students of color, 89, 90, 91, you can bet that of the 131, 90% or more were first generation college students, doing really well enough to be invited to this very exclusive program. And you can imagine how many corporations were climbing all over them to try to hire them for their own organizations. So it wasn't surprising that they weren't going to go back home and say, I'm staying 5 more years to get something called a PhD, never ever having met one, never knew anybody with a PhD in marketing or strategy or organizational behavior. This is all foreign stuff. Excuse me. So they were planting seeds because we've now found out that 45 or 50 of them emerged through the PhD project some number of years later. So we changed the model. We said, we're not going to go after people who are in college about to finish. Let's go after people already in corporate careers. By now, they know whether a corporate career is for them. Are they being personally, professionally fulfilled? Is this really is it following their passion for what they want to do with their lives? And we launched it. I'd like to say it was a pilot. It was a pilot that was flying a plane who had never been in a plane before. But the first year we decided to have a conference to bring these people together, to get them to learn about career as a professor, what a doctoral program is really like. We were shocked. 570 people applied. They were really cute little 10-page paper applications, which were driving us crazy because we weren't prepared for that. But at any rate, 270 people were invited to our conference because it was invitational. We wanted to have only people who seemed to have the credentials that were necessary. 266 came, and 50 some entered a doctoral program either the next year or a couple of years following. So that was the beginning. That's how we launched it, and we've learned every year since to be better at it.
Wow. So this resonates so much with me, having worked in higher ed. And I literally last night was on a birthday Zoom for one of the first African-American administrators, VP level at Duke University. And on the call were all of these other first Blacks from Duke who are now leading. There's so much faculty of color there, and they've created this inclusive environment. But I think you said you got to plant the seeds early. And so on the call, they talked about how there were just 3 at some point in the late 80s, early 90s. And now there are so many of them on the campus. And you're right, it's a welcoming environment for those students. I think the other piece that resonates a lot with us is we talk about it is risky, but you convinced a lot of corporate entities to take this risk with you. Now, I know over the years, over $50 million has been invested in this initiative, 18 million of which came from the KPMG Foundation. Right. But talk to me about how you end up getting corporations like a John Deere, an American Express, a New York Life, those types of companies. And then you convince 300 plus academic institutions, and we all know how higher ed could be sometimes, to really buy into this project. And I asked that question, I'm going to ask that question and put a pin in it because I think it's important for our members to see how you build the relationships needed. What are the tactics? How do you bring everybody to the table? And then the other thing I want to say is that we don't get the best in human resources without the professors that are teaching human resources. And as you know, or may not know, one of the seats on SHRM's board of directors is held for an academic, someone who is in the profession, teaching the profession at some of the best business schools in the country. And so as we try to diversify and make the profession of human resources more inclusive, we really should look to programs like the PhD project, because so many of the people who are getting their doctorates in HR are coming through schools of business. So for our HR people who are watching this is a correlation we can make in terms of how we can diversify the profession by diversifying the academics who are teaching that profession at the doctoral level.
Absolutely. That's the whole theory behind our program, is that we, if we don't have people, I mean, we in the corporate world, we in the employer world, can only hire what is produced by the universities. So the role of the PhD project with putting people of color in the front of the classroom is twofold: is to attract students of color, clearly, which then gives the employers more people they can hire from. And we have so many people who are in organizational behavior, organizational development, would be perfect for HR and for the SHRM board. But also the thing that we've never tested this, but you know, our K-12 system is segregated. It's probably more segregated now than it ever has been. So you get a white student who's going to college. Let me tell you a story. There was a dean named Mel Smith. He was at Florida State. Mel is about 6'5". He wants me to say 240. He was probably closer to 280, but you know, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But a very imposing person and terrific African-American academic. He then became the dean at Syracuse. He then became the interim president at Norfolk State, where he got his undergraduate.
I know him, and he worked in the UNC system as well at one point.
Yeah, he did. Mel's a terrific guy. At any rate, at our first conference, we had a reporter show up from one of the Chicago papers. Her name was Deborah Rather. I'll never forget that, 1994. And then she said she would come for 15 minutes, and she stayed 3.5 hours. She was blown away to see so many people of color who were thinking about leaving their careers. They've got mortgages, they have kids. I mean, it's like making this huge, life-changing decision. So at the last, as she wanted to get to leave, she turned to Mel, and I was in the room with him. And she said, look, at the end of the day, what is the big deal? He said, here's the big deal. I'm an 18-year-old Black kid, and I go to this traditionally white institution, and I see white professors, I see white administrators. And then I go to lunch, and I see the Blacks in the cafeteria serving the food. I go to my dormitory, I see the Blacks cleaning the floor and taking care of the bathrooms. So, it kind of establishes what the right roles are. And, I'm a Black kid, and I see that, and it tells me something. I'm a white kid, and it says, oh, this is the right roles for people of color versus white people. He said, that's the big deal. Now you flip that around, you put a Black professor in the front of that classroom. Just think about how inspiring, how encouraging, how reinforcing that is. But then think about the attitudes of the white students by the end of the semester. They've never seen a person of color in a leadership role as the knowledge expert until they get to the corporate world, which is why the corporate world is spending so much time and so much money on diversity initiatives and learning to work with each other. And, all of this stuff we've been doing for decades. It's because the product we're hiring is so poorly produced.
What a story. And it is, we need more faces. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And we always say at SHRM as well, it's not just in corporate America, right? Some of our largest nonprofits, if you look at their 990s, are making tons of money, are creating the executives of the present and the future. And people are not seeing people that look like them in those leadership positions. And I think it's important that you've also got partners from some of the largest associations or some of these large nonprofits who've also committed to this project as well.
Well, Emily, I'm so thrilled. I chaired the search committee for the new CEO of the Points of Light Foundation, which I served on for over 20 years, established by Bush 41. And Natalie Paquin is her name. She's African-American. She's amazing. She used to be I guess, the #2 person in Girl Scouts of America. She was involved with the Philadelphia school system, the Chicago school system. She's absolutely amazing. And it just sends a huge signal to our entire population of people associated with the Points of Light. But you talked about corporations, how we got corporations involved, and it wasn't easy because this program is systemic. This program does not enable you to immediately invest some money and then say to your leaders, oh, I just hired a person of color for a position, because we're trying to build a future. So it takes a corporation who understands to really deal with this issue. It has to be strategic. It has to be systemic. It has to be long-term. You have to have patience. And you can't roll out these metrics that say, oh, we gave $25,000 and we hired 6 interns, so therefore we've been successful in the investment we made in that organization. In the beginning, it was really high-risk money. We had four founders, KPMG and Citibank being the only 2 corporate foundation founders, GMAC that produces the GMAT test, and AACSB, the deans of business schools. But now there's no risk. Now there's 1,500 minority professors out there in universities, so that if the corporations are smart in the way they work with us, they make relationships with the minority faculty who have incredibly tight relationships with the minority students they're teaching. So therefore, it's a way to get access to minority students early on in their academic career, hire them as interns, hire them as permanent employees, and you really get a leg up on the competition, because the competition won't know those people are there until they get into career services. But our faculty have office hours that are just jammed with students of color. And it's interesting, you have a Black professor and Hispanic students show up and Native American students show up because they kind of feel more comfortable, more trusting environment as opposed to the typical, middle-aged or older white, usually male professor. So the sponsors, again, if they work at it, can really get tremendous ROI from their investment in the PhD project.
So I didn't say this from the beginning, but the PhD project actually pays for these students to matriculate in their, So let's clarify what it does, because I think a lot of people are saying, well, this sounds good, right? Yeah. But how do we pay for 5 years of education? What is it that it supports? So can you give us some more details about that?
I certainly can. What's unique about getting a PhD in business, it doesn't really matter whether minority, majority student, doesn't really matter. PhDs in business are free. Universities do not charge tuition, do not charge fees, and they give a doctoral stipend. Some of the schools give as much as $40,000 a year. You can teach over the summer and have other projects over the summer for more money. So rather than believing that it's a significant negative cash flow and you're giving up your income by leaving your career, it's actually a modest positive cash flow. And it's really because they would never be able to attract doctoral students if they had to give up their income and pay a huge tuition or huge fees. We always said in the beginning, there were 4 myths that would cause people to say, no way. And the first myth was, I guess I have to have an MBA before I can get a PhD. The answer is no. You can go right in with an undergraduate degree. The second myth was, it must be horribly, horribly expensive, because I know what an MBA would cost. And of course, the answer is no, it's free. Plus you get paid to go to college to get your doctorate. The third myth, because of our model, if you knew anybody who got a PhD in chemistry or physics or biology or went to law school or dental school or medical school, it was right through their normal academic experience. So therefore, any break, like 10 years, we have had people who started a doctoral program in their late 40s and early 50s. Therefore, if there was a break, that meant you were not going to be an attractive candidate. The reverse is true, because in order to be in the front of the classroom teaching business, organizational behavior, organizational development, whatever it might be, being able to lend your experience to your academic knowledge is really huge. I mean, and we call them war stories, but it's really huge in bringing the theory to life. So they were the big three myths that we had to dispel. And the fourth one was, after doing all of that, after paying a lot of money, you don't have to do that, and get an MBA, you don't have to do that. You take a vow of poverty, because all of the articles will tell you that PhDs don't make any money. There's article after article after article that says there are too many PhDs, they're waiting on tables. You know, do you want ketchup with that, is kind of the thing they say. But it's not true. It's not true in business. There's a huge, huge demand for business school professors. And if you lay on top of that, that there's a demand to have diverse faculty, you come out with a PhD with what I call a double demand factor. The industry itself and the trustees and the president and the deans demanding that they have to have a more diverse faculty. We virtually never have someone finish their doctorate where they don't tell us that they've been invited for 7 or 8 what they call job talks, for interviews. I'll get calls all the time. Bernie, I've got 4 offers. I'm not sure what to do. I know, can you help me sort through which of the 4 I should do? And I always answer no. I'm not going to help you sort which job you take. So it's those 4 myths dispelled. It's a great opportunity. There's huge demand. Compensation is extremely high. And you can do it without an MBA. You don't have to pay, and you're never too old.
So for my HR professionals who are watching this,
yeah,
I think this turns into I guess a career talk for some of them who are passionate, because there's so many who are passionate about helping the next generation who are actually seated in positions and teaching their experiences, that you could really make a bigger difference by preparing yourself to be in the classrooms of the future and preparing the next generation of HR professionals. So that's one great takeaway from this. And it's critical if we talk about racial equity and creating inclusive environments. The next piece I'd like to talk about is, from the beginning, one of the objectives for the PhD project was to create a nurturing environment where you would bring together the participants in the program. I know you've got an annual conference, and I just thought it was so interesting that in the objectives is listed, create this environment of nurture. And to me, it translated into a sense of belonging. What you talked about a lot was creating environments within institutions where the students could feel like they belonged because there was someone in front of that room that looked like them or was a minority. So I think for our HR professionals on here, here's another opportunity to think about creating programming that looks toward the future, but also says, look, we can also lead with belonging and inclusiveness. We've talked a lot about leading with I instead of D and I, leading with I and D, inclusivity and diversity. And I think there's a lot of that in this project. So if I go back to tactics though, and I'm an HR professional, and I've seen I've heard about the PhD project. What tactics did you use to really get people to get engaged when the risk was really high, especially the CEOs of these organizations or the people who were decision makers? And do you think any of those tactics could resonate or be used with our HR professional that maybe is just at director level or not at the C-suite yet, but has an idea about filling a gap where we need to see more HR professionals in a certain area?
Yeah, well, I mean, the biggest tactic we used was to build that network. I mean, all the corporations now have, employee resource groups, so it's become sort of a natural thing to do because we understand the power of it and we understand the power of people coming together. But, think about, I have to tell you a story to as a preface to this, and her name's Carolyn Callahan. Carolyn's now in the provost office at the University of Louisville, but she's been the dean places, and Carolyn's wonderful. Carolyn was a doctoral student before we started the PhD project at Michigan State. There was one Black in the accounting faculty, and there were no Blacks in the doctoral program. Carolyn at the time was married with children. So she came to one of our early pre-planning conferences, and she said, could I tell you a story? First of all, she shouldn't have been at this meeting because she had just had surgery. The doctor said, you will not travel. She said, I've got to go to New Jersey to be part of this program because I think they're really serious and they're really going to make a big difference. So she sat there in the first row and she raised her hand and she said, I'll tell you a story. She said, I was at Michigan State in a doctoral program, one Black on the faculty. There's no assurance that that person, and Carolyn's African-American, no assurance that the two of us would actually gel just because we both happen to be Black, right? And she said, I didn't know another Black in the country who was in a doctoral program in business. There was no way to know. She said, and as things would happen to me in the doctoral program, which seemed to be like kind of off-putting, she said, I didn't know if it was because I'm Black. She actually went through this, or whether I'm a Black female, or whether because I'm a Black married female, or because I'm a Black married female with children. And I looked at her and I said, oh my God. While the other students are thinking about the problem or the case that they're talking about, you've got running through your head all of these issues. How unfair to expect you to be dealing with those 5 maybes and this one problem that's been put in front of you. I said, we're going to fix that. And she said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't have a clue. I don't have a clue. But we cannot have people leave their jobs, sell their houses, kids change schools, enter a doctoral program, and run into that kind of an environment. Can't happen. So what we did is we found every doctoral student of color in business in the country, and we brought them together. So now we had a network. We had this nurturing, which became a family. And then we decided, well, because every one of these business disciplines is discrete, whether it's accounting, finance, information systems, marketing, management, even within management, strategy, OB, whatever. So we now have 5 what we call doctoral student organizations by discipline. So they come together every summer. So a person who has not even started yet, will be starting in September. Our conferences are in August. They come to the conference. They've never been into a doctoral seminar yet, but now they're part of a network of people in every stage of their doctoral program in that same discipline across the university, across the country, including those who just finished, which means we'll have a graduation ceremony. So not only are they meeting people who are in the programs, they're seeing that people actually finish. They'll hear about the jobs they got, the placements they have, the excitement they have about their career finally starting. And they come together every summer. So yeah, it's a real nurturing environment, which is it's the same thing you hear about Black colleges. The unique thing about Black colleges is there's almost always this nurturing environment. So we're recreating that, except that we have Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, and they come together as an organization. And we've been at it long enough now that we have alumni associations at that same conference, because we'll have our conference for the doctoral students in the same location the 2 days prior to the professional conference. So in HR, it would be the Academy of Management. Right? So we get the top people from the Academy of Management to come in to be our speakers. Our doctoral students go to the Academy meeting and meet these top professors that they only read about or whose research they read. And this is something that is unique to minority doctoral students, because the majority doctoral students have no one to fund that, and the universities won't send them. So it's one of those nice times in life when the minority doctoral students get a leg up on the other doctoral students.
Wow. So I love when, look, I think we have to say to people, we know that you can't solve so many of the issues related to racial equity in the workplace overnight. Right. And what I loved about this project, and one of the reasons I wanted us to talk about it, was because it's 25, almost 26 years later, and it's still going, and it is producing systemic change. And Absolutely. That meant that KPMG Foundation, Citigroup, all of your partners really understood the importance of being there for the long haul. So I would say again, and it's funny because we had an interview with Mark Howes from John Deere and his LEAP Coalition, that sometimes we can't expect change to happen overnight, but we can put the systems in place and put the programs in place that will deliver long-term if we have continued commitment that this is not something that we're going to turn our backs on 2 or 3 years down the line just because we don't have metrics. We know that's the right thing to do.
That's what's so amazing at KPMG. We've been through 5 or 6 CEOs since we started the PhD project. And, you know, a new CEO comes in, they have their own ideas of what they might want to do, and they're all good ideas. But to see the staying power, it's really hard to find a signature diversity program started by a corporate entity that has lasted a quarter century.
Yeah.
And there is absolutely zero evidence. We have a new CEO at KPMG, Paul Knopp, and he was on the foundation board that helped to birth this thing. And you can bet that he's all over it. He just thinks it's an essential thing to do, even if KPMG has to put in far more money than any other corporate sponsor. I mean, KPMG is putting in $350,000 a year, whereas most corporate sponsors are putting in 25 or 50 because they believe it has to be done and somebody has to do it and we're going to do it.
Wow. It has to be done. Somebody's got to do it and we're going to do it.
Yeah. You know, I have to brag about what's happened when you talked about the maturation of the program and people administration. My wife, Sharon, and I ended up going to 2 presidential inaugurations this last year, one at Linfield College it's now Linfield University in Oregon. Miles Davis, African-American, is the new president, came through the PhD project. Irma Becerra is the new president at Marymount in Arlington, Virginia, PhD project. Erica James is the new dean at the Wharton School, first African-American dean at the Wharton School, first female dean at the Wharton School, PhD project. The new president at Simmons College, Lynn Wooten Perry, African-American, female, PhD project. So that's the beauty. If it's been around that long, you really start to see that, and the further up you go, the wider your beam is, the more impact you have on everybody in the institution. So we actually have a program that prepares people to become department heads, deans, provosts, presidents. I have a meeting on Friday. We have a program that prepares some of our more senior folks, like Eli Jones, the dean at Texas A&M, is now on a major corporate board because we're preparing. Corporate boards will tell you one of the biggest problems they have is the lack of diversity. Well, we're sitting there with these incredibly brilliant people. Normally, academics are not welcome on boards because they're, quote, too academic. But think of our model. Our people came through the corporate world. They had budgetary responsibilities. They had administrative responsibilities. And now they have a PhD. And now they're on a major university and they have a major position in administration there. Perfect for public company boards. So we're working with search firms actually to help position our more senior people to go on public company boards or large nonprofit boards.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I love to see the tentacles of this program. And as you said, things take time, and over 25 years in, we see the fruit of your labor as one of the people who led this for the majority of the time. And I can't thank you enough because it's so important that we've had your voice as a member of the BRC, asking critical questions about how we can affect systemic change, and with the understanding that whatever we do, whatever outcome, it's got to be, you can have some short-term wins, but you've got to think about putting in long-term systemic change. What will create long-term systemic change? So right. I guess I want to ask you one final question. If you could give 3 top points to any person, any professional listening to this interview about how you can be the person to affect change in your organization, what would those 3 points be?
Oh my, I guess the first is you have to already have established credibility in the organization as being legitimate, as really having a passion for what you're doing and a passion for the organization that you're working in. That your whole self is to make the corporation and the environment in that corporation or that employer stronger than it presently is. And then you have to have the courage to, you mentioned courage before, is to put yourself on the line, to go to whomever you have to go to, whether it's the foundation to get the money or it's to the senior leadership to get the human resource support, to say, yeah, this is a startup nonprofit or a startup organization. I've looked at the people who are running it, who are behind it. There's an organization I'm involved with, which is dealing with first generation college students. The woman who runs it now for 7 years has never taken a paycheck from the organization. And all the money to run the organization has come out of her own checking account. And she's not independently wealthy. So did I climb on that immediately? Absolutely. Just think about the person and what that person has invested because they believe in what they're doing. So you have personal credibility of the organization or the activity that you want to support. And then find partners. Find partners, because when you go to your own leadership and say, not only do I think it's really great to do, but I've talked to so-and-so from this corporation and they would like to partner with us in doing this. Being willing, one thing that's really frustrated me with my corporate friends from time to time is they want signature programs and they don't want to put funds into a program where somebody else is seen to be the leader. And that's one of the issues we have with the PhD project, that KPMG is seen to be the leader of it. So being willing to want to get the maximum result and have the maximum impact and not worry about whether you get 100% of the credit for doing it.
Wow. So those are my three. I'm going to leave with everyone here: credibility, courage, and partnership, CCP.
Yeah, that's good.
I think that's pretty good. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule. And that's why I say retired is a misnomer. He's not really retired. You just heard him say he's still working on PhD project stuff. He's working on some other first generation student work. Yeah. So you're staying busy, and and he's on BRC, and you are still a member of the President's Board of Advisors on HBCU. So you've got an amazing schedule for somebody that's retired, but we truly appreciate you using your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience to help us address critical issues in the workplace. And thank you for taking time out of your schedule today to chat with me a little bit about this crucial issue.
Well, thank you for your leadership on the BRC and Trump's board. We've only been productive because of you and your efforts. And thank you for allowing the PhD project to tell our story.
Thank you.